Kalispera, kalimera, kalinichta. No matter where in this wild, wacky, and sometimes wonderful world you might be, thank you for making the Highbury Squad part of your day. Have been enjoying the shows and being back this week. And I tell you, I've been really looking forward to this one. Number one, because I know you guys love to go back a little. Number two, he's an epic human being and a very good friend. And he is going to share some great stories with us. And we're going to get his take on what's to come for the Arsenal this season. Let's rock and roll, squaddies. Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Please stand clear of the discussion doors. The next stop is Highbury Squad. Hola, hola, hola. For those of you joining us live, thank you so much. Those who are listening on replay and audio platforms, thank you so much. We are trying to resume to a normal schedule. We'll get our communications out to you as soon as we can. The shows will generally be around 8, but we might shift gears a little bit timing wise this week. We've come at you at different hours. So if you're just tuning in, keep your ears and eyes posted on our community page on YouTube, and we will keep sharing when the shows are going live then. Firstly, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Dicky Thursday, and also announce, I think I've told some of you, that the Dicky Thursday show will be premiering next season, a one-on-one conversations with special guests. And I know that this fella is definitely going to be appearing on the Dicky Thursday show, although I'm not sure I've ever seen him in a Dicky At Squaddies, and welcome David Hillier, former Arsenal midfield maestro.
At ease, and thank you for having me back, Soph. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a break, hasn't it? And yeah, great to be back on a Dicky Thursday. No, I don't wear Dicky but back in the day, this is the first little snippet of one of the sort of stories it will lead on to later, is when we used to have our Christmas dinner, the apprentices. It was the first time we got to dress up in front of our peers, as it were, and we'd go into London at one of the posh hotels and have a Christmas dinner, and we'd wear a Dicky bow. So yeah, I didn't get it out tonight, but I will there will be a Thursday in the future. I will wear one, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Fantastic. I'm sporting mine today, and I'd like to say I bought this about 10 years ago from a vintage shop in California, and it was an old war veterans Dicky bow, and so
Nice.
I'm very proudly sporting this today on Dicky Bow Thursday. Good evening, all the usual suspects: Carol, Tammy, PW, Ian's in the house. Hawkwind's in the house. Let's see who else is here. Trev's here. There's a whole bunch of you here. Demsec is here. We've got Greeny Man here. Our chief like officer will keep you all in check. George G from Essex. Oh, we love an Essex boy. Miss Melina is here. Rich is here. The whole fam jam is here. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you missed the shows earlier this week, you can catch them on replay on YouTube with Tom Canton and Dan Potts. But tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. And I know that you squaddies really enjoy these shows when we shift gears and go a little bit back, but also weave it into what's happening now with the Arsenal in the future. And so I reached out to David. And one of the things that people talk about a lot is they compare eras, David. And some people say, oh, players back then would never be able to survive the game today. There's too many games. They wouldn't be able to go through preseason, etc., etc. All I know is that you played under a manager that was tough as nails, and he was always hungry to succeed. He changed the culture of Arsenal Football Club. Of course, you and Kev joined when you were young pups. By the way, he loved a wig. I think he's got a picture with everyone in a wig, doesn't he?
I used to have that was my wig back then, Soph, as well. You know, I had a bit of a wig. I'm sporting a bit of a different hairdo these days, but yeah. Back in the day, we all had hair.
Good old stuff. You were part of, a team that won and won a lot. And I just wanted to start off with, what was pre-season training like for you watching as a youngster? You know, you were captain of that FA Youth Cup team, Super Kev, and you and your teammates. I know that we've talked privately, and he's talked about how this was probably one of the most magical, fondest memories of his entire career. But how do
Yeah.
you go from being captain of the Arsenal youth team and your daily method of operation then to then all of a sudden you're in the first team and you find yourself in a George Graham preseason environment type of
Well,
situation?
it's kind of weird that you picked those two photographs. So I didn't know you was going to put those two out, but
No, I haven't told you
those
anything.
two, those two pictures were probably the entirety of the whole playing squad of Arsenal Football Club in one given year. So what have you got there? Probably 24 players in that picture, and probably, I don't know, 16, 18. Well, not even that. That's just the team. So there'd have been 4 or 5 subs in that game. So 16, 18. I seem to have disappeared. Let me try and get myself back. There you go. See, I'm up with the tech now. Yeah,
I
so
love it.
those pictures was basically the whole squad. So we came together on one day at the start of June. I think we used to start back in June. And I've got this image in my mind that it was June 7th, June 8th. We came back a week before the first team to set everything up. And basically we ran for a week, we trained for a week without them. And they came to a place in North London called Trent Park, where we did our training sessions for the first 2 weeks of our pre-season, which was just running and body weight exercises. And all of a sudden you was thrust from being a 15 and a half year old come 16-year-old, not in a working environment, never, just left school. All of a sudden chucked in a gym, stripping off and changing with all these first team players with the likes of Viv Anderson back in the day, Charlie Nicholas, big stars. You had Stevie Williams in the first team. You obviously had the Boldy had just come, Lee Dixon had just come, Nigel had just turned up that first pre-season. And we was just literally all in one big gymnasium, getting changed, ready to go out on a 3 or 4 hour training session. And we did that for 2 weeks. There was no introduction. There was no big time. Us players have been working together for the previous 2 years. Just on a Monday and a Thursday, we've been training at Highbury. So that was our only coming together. And on the odd weekend when we'd probably have some of the Irish lads would come over. And then all of a sudden, 16, thrown into the workplace, you're a footballer, mate. And that was it. And you turned up and you had all these big stars you've been watching, and now you're cleaning their boots and working alongside them. And George had this routine and regime where we all did the same. We did exactly the same training, the same running. We'd done the same ball work in those first couple of weeks. And it was just a bonding. It was 2 weeks of bonding through pain. Basically, that's what it was. And then we'll talk about it later. Then came pre-season tours and the pleasure part of pre-season. But
you talk about the bonding. Sorry, David, that we broke up there a little bit. You talk about the bonding, and I want to get to the art of brotherhood with you because I know that was a big deal for you, for Kev. We've talked to Paul Davis about that on this show. Lee Dixon, Smudger, everyone, and Perry Groves as well, who's got brilliant stories too. But I just wanted to hone in a little bit on, because Ian wrote back then there was no sports science. That was the other thing I wanted to, they're going into preseason now with all this data, all this analytics. They wear the vests, how many kilometers they ran last season. You've got to pick it up 2 kilometers this season. George was smart, though. A lot like, Wenger gets a lot of credit for changing nutrition, diets, evolutionary in terms of a manager coming into the Premier League with his ideas. Even Sir Alex Ferguson has credited him for that. But without all of the scientific stuff, can you take us into George's brain a little bit? Because you talk about running and training on a Tuesday and a Thursday. but you went on to win and had this mentality that maybe only Liverpool had at that time. Talk us through that a little bit and what is built in pre-season to get even to that spot.
Well, I think first and foremost, George had been brought up an Arsenal player, so he understood the kind of the style of the upbringing. I mean, for instance, if you was at Tottenham, it was all like pass and move, let's play fancy football. At Arsenal, from 14, it was graft, work hard, win games as a team, use your best assets to the best of their ability, like we did with Kevin. I mean, you've got there, that was our complete coaching squad. I mean, you look at the back row, Terry Murphy and Steve Burtonshaw, the top two on the right-hand side, wasn't even coaches. So you only had George Armstrong, who came along later. That's just after the original, because you would have had Theo Foley there before Stuart Houston when I joined. So we sort of had 6 people looking after us, and it was very much we all sing from the same hymn sheet. So whatever running the first team are doing, the youth team are doing, the reserves are doing. But going back to that first day, like I said, we were just thrown in with our players. You had every apprentice had 2 players that they looked after. So you looked after their boots, you looked after their kit. You're responsible for that. There was 2 kit men, one for the youth and reserves, one for the first team. And there was even an hierarchy in between those 2. You know, the first team kit man was in charge of the youth team kit man, but we all did the same thing. And I think George's mentality was to just get everybody fit, everybody together, and everybody playing exactly the same. And I've said this recently. I think Mikel Arteta is very similar. He wants players of a similar mentality that can play a certain way together. And it doesn't matter whether you're a big star, whether you're the best on the planet. It's just, does he think that you can play in that team? And we went in on that first day with the likes of Merce, Tony Adams, Mickey Thomas, Davo, Martin Hayes, all coming through the youth development team. That's Steve Burtonshaw and Terry Murphy. And that was like, you know, we could be those players in 2 or 3 years. And then it started. And that youth team picture that you could see there, we was all so tuned into the same thing. I speak to them now, and every one of them says that was the best time of their football career, regardless of what they went on to do in life. That bonding session, those first couple of years, made us.
I find it really fascinating, because you and I have talked a lot about, you know, the journey. And, you know, Ramsdale had a great quote from the England camp where they asked him about how he feels being on the sideline. And he said, I'm living 60 million people in England's dream, and there's one guy living my dream, and he's doing a really good job about it. And someone said in the chat that you're probably one of the most underrated Arsenal players. But I think what we don't see as fans, and we have it in our workplace, you know, you're part of a really good team, you root for each other, but in sports, it's a little bit different. People talk about these brotherhoods, these friendships that emerge, families. You guys are in a group together still after all the years of, you know, when you guys first started out, you and Kev still so super close. You guys are in a WhatsApp group together. You go through so much. Do you think you guys are responsible for that? Or is it the culture you're in that cultivated that?
No, I think you're right. I think the second point is more likely that we was part of a culture. We went into it, we embraced it, and that formed our path through life. I mean, that's why we go back to them days. I mean, all of us, anyone would take being 18 again, wouldn't they? Regardless of riches and and all the things you've achieved just for the health and for the feeling of well-being and freeness. Back then we didn't have the pressures on us of today's society, so we was pretty much, you know, what career you're going to go into? Well, I've got a chance of being a footballer. Well, then you're shoved into it. And then we had this club come along that took this group of players and had taken groups of players before that and give them a purpose. And you just roll with it. You just when you come through the ranks, you roll with it. People like Perry and Nigel and Lee and Baldy, they've come from different backgrounds. So that for me, they should always claim their youth team days at their clubs as their beginnings. So they came into the Arsenal. We'd already established that. People like me and Kev had been in it for 2 or 3 years before that as 12, 13, 14-year-olds. So we was prepared for that. But that's kind of all you could see in front of you. And it wasn't a career to make money. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, it felt really good and really right. And Arsenal embraced that. George embraced that. And what he did most importantly was all of his staff were Arsenal through and through. Pat Rice, George Armstrong later on. Like I said, the kit man, Bill Graves and Tony Donnelly.
Was Vic Akers was around?
Vic Akers was at Watford. I think he was at Watford when he was a player, but it was we're still very Watford and Arsenal are very close. They're very close connections. The training grounds, obviously, you know, very close to each other now. But yeah, there's always been tight connections, and I think it was important to keep it all close. And we just rolled into the next stages. It didn't even seem like you became a pro footballer. It was just part of the natural progression.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's really fascinating to me. And I wanted to jump to this a little later, but I want to bring it up with you now, because in addition to because George had those relationships with the 71 squad, right? To this day, you still see him. They get together, Frank McClintock, Charlie George, an incredible double winning side. And he carried that through. And he also had he could tap into the mentality of winning. And I think when you look at successful managers in the modern game, being able to tap into, when I'm talking to you as a man, right? He's talking to you as a man. It's like coaches, they say sometimes if you're overweight as a coach and you're talking to an athlete, sometimes they won't take you seriously. And I say that with the most respect. A lot of the times players, especially in the modern game, what do you know? What have you won? Right? So I'm wondering, do you think because you were able to stand there in front of someone like George Graham and the people that he was surrounded by, knowing that they were winners, and he could transmit that? Because when I interviewed Edu last summer on the Arsenal tour, and he talked to me about Edu and Mikel Arteta being able to transmit the Arsenal DNA. And in particular with Edu being and what he won at the club and being part of that team, he's able to transmit something quite different on an elevated level. Mikel Arteta was able to transmit what it was like, you know, to win an FA Cup. Do you think that DNA exists now for them? And do you think Edu's right that those guys are able to transmit that similarly to what you experienced with George?
I think first and foremost, we're operating in different eras. And I think, I'm not saying foreign players have a different perspective to what English players do, or even break it down even closer than that, London players do. And then break it down even more like North London players do, if that's your club. So you've got Spanish players and, you know, Brazilian players coming in and appreciating the feeling of being part of a London football club. But as a London kid, back in the day, before you had the foreign players coming in, it was absolutely the pinnacle of your dreams to play for your London club. I mean, I was brought up with Charlton, Millwall, but as I got older, and obviously Arsenal showed an interest, Arsenal took over completely. But I think there is slightly a different perspective when you come from a foreign person's culture and background into that thing that we had, the London thing. And George, I think, was probably the last manager to be able to carry that through the club because of the influx of international players. When George came, obviously we know that international started coming, but before that, it was predominantly your English, Irish, and Scots playing in the Football League. And to be London boys growing up in London, playing for what we consider the best club in London, you could have asked me and Kev any day of the week. We was in the best place in the world. But it was a slightly different feeling than being a foreigner coming. When you're a Londoner playing in that, you're fighting every fight for every street kid, every working class kid, and all of that. I think it's kind of a little bit different now. Like we said, it's much more professional. You've got all the nutritional advice. You're building yourself to be a footballer from a very young age now. Whereas we didn't realistically think we was going to be footballers probably until we got to about 15, 16.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality of it. You got kids now at 8 and 9 being sort of channeled into that, the right lifestyles, the right dietary requirements, the right training. We had none of that. We used to turn up, Soph, on every morning as soon as I was an apprentice, we got off at Arsenal tube station, 10 of us in the morning, 7:30, getting off the tube. We go straight to ZZ's little sweet shop, and for breakfast we'd have a bottle of Coke, a packet of crisps, and a chocolate bar. Right, and everyone would buy the same. And ZZ was this big, tall Jewish woman who, she was brilliant. She was like Fagin. She loved all the kids, and she'd sort of hunch over in her shop, give us. Everybody did the same. That was our breakfast. That's not a sportsman's breakfast, is it? So
No,
that's how we'd start our
really.
day back then. So it's all a little bit different, I think, for the English and the foreign players back then. So when they say they understand the like the derbies and stuff like that, of course they understand them from a playing point of view, but not from playing against them kids at 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16. So it went a little bit deeper for us. And I think that was the last time that we will see that happen.
Yeah. And it would be the same, for example, for Maldini at AC Milan and Totti
Absolutely.
at Roma. It's your city, it's your club, it's your place, it's all of those things. And back then, I can't. I'm just going to try and find the comment, but I think North Bank Guna did it because at that time, Smudge, Dixon, Baldy, and Winterburn may as well have been foreigners coming to London, right?
Yeah. Well, they was all new. They was all new.
Yeah. And it's the evolution of football and how it's just become such a global game. So let me ask you the question then that I alluded to at the top of the show, because you're talking about having a packet of crisps and a Coke, and we heard the stories about Wenger taking ketchup off tables, and foreign managers who come in, the first thing they do is get rid of the ketchup on the tables. Do you think that if you were an athlete in today's time, any of you, would you be able to kind of go through what the modern day player goes through? Is that just all a myth? They're leaner, they're fitter, they play more games, they may play more games than they ever did back in the day. They don't get a rest. Football is 365 days a year now. Do you think that there's truth in that?
I think there's definitely. I don't think players from our era would have been able to be plucked out of that era, put into today's era, and then operate at that level. I don't think that would happen, because we like I said, every player was doing the same. Everybody weren't really taking care of their dietary needs, and we was having a good time alongside it. On probably days when we shouldn't have. The preparation probably wasn't as great as it is now, and I think the margins now are a lot more defined between being a sportsman, a high-level sportsman than just someone who is really good at sport. So back in the day, we had naturally talented players who were really good at sport. If you put them in today's game and gave them 10 years of academy training and build up before their pro career, they'd be a different player anyway. So it's a really hard call for me when I see natural players from the past, people like Gaza. I mean, you take Gaza any day of the week, you'd say, yeah, he'd get in any top team now. But the simple fact is he probably wouldn't. Fitness wise, he wouldn't be statistically up there with the best players in the squad. Results wise, he'd probably be lacking on output. All through is the way he lives his life. But had he lived 10 years in their world, would he have still been Gaza? That's the question, you know. Would that have been taken out of him? Would he have been more of an engineered player? So it's swings and roundabouts. Pitches back then as well. So we used to drag ourselves around a mud bath for 80 minutes. Players don't have that now. So
yeah, no, it's true. And it's that, you know, I was talking to someone about Wimbledon the other day, Djokovic and Alcaraz, and I was like, well, let's see how Alcaraz would have done with a Djokovic in his heyday, not in the twilight of his career. Because everyone's like, oh, he wiped the floor with him. Well, yeah, Djokovic has got a lot of mileage under his belt, a lot different. But if they're in the same time, at the same place, in the same era, how would that look like? And sometimes I feel the same way about football. You know, everyone says, oh, Messi's the greatest player of all time. Is he? Because I saw Maradona play. Let me tell you, he was pretty good. And I know you did too. So I find all that really interesting. Let's get stuck into a little bit about the art of winning. I want to take it to 3 phases, right? Because they say everything begins in pre-season. The discipline. I saw your funny tweet, by the way. We'll get to the fun stuff after. But they say the discipline, a lot of the greatest managers talk about it. The journey begins in pre-season. Now, a lot of fans that, you know, we get so spoiled with football. Oh, pre-season. But on these tours and you get to see players, fans get to see players they wouldn't ordinarily. And Arteta talked about the journey a lot in All or Nothing. And we started with the art of team spirit and we talked about the brotherhood and stuff. But the pain of the journey, right? Does it start in pre-season? And then, by the way, that's David buried under a Crystal Palace player there who I can't make
just see
out.
myself there, yeah.
Tony Adams
I was quite often buried under players back in the day. Yeah, there's a lot of photos like that.
I do. I have another one of you here. By the way, that Norwich player actually looks like your brother. If you didn't know any better, you'd be like, that's David Hillier playing for Norwich. No, Paul Merson, I think that is looking on, thinking he's getting stuck in again. Talk about, and a lot of people are talking about the Jan Mulby stuff and if he's still in your back pocket. So I just by coincidence, I had this picture with Liverpool, one of their worst kits ever. But let's talk about the pain and the journey and where it actually truly begins, and if pre-season does play the significant role in setting the tone.
Yeah, I think it does. Like I said, when we went in, it was a very strict regime for those first 2 weeks. We literally spent 2 weeks at Trent Park, 6-mile run every morning. We'd run a mile. We'd do 100 press ups, 100 sit ups, 100 squats. This is how basic it was, Soph. I mean, this is like as basic as it gets. We'd do all these things where you'd have a partner on your back and you'd do squats. It's a bit like watching the old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie of him when he became what he is. You know, sort of. It was really prehistoric. The training, lifting sort of bags of sand instead of weights, all stuff like that. But it was all team based. Like I said, it was carrying people up a hill. We actually had a run where we did it at London Colney, where it was a mile around London Colney, or 1.1 miles, and George Graham broke us into 2 squads. This is George Graham for you. He broke us into 2 squads, all mixed youth team players, reserve team players and first team players. And he said, right, I want you all as a group to run it as fast as you can. And the person who's the slowest in each group will take their times, and you need to beat that by a minute when you do it in 20 minutes time. So we all done this mile. We did it in like 6.5 minutes. And he said, right, you've got to beat that now by a minute. And we was like, oh yeah, we can do that. Because we'd all saved a little bit, you know, we all hadn't run as hard as we could. And George Graham went, yeah, you think you're clever, don't you? He said, this time you've got to beat it, but you've got to carry your heaviest player. So we're all thinking we've got, and now the stakes have been upped. So we've had to carry, I think we carried Alan Miller, the goalkeeper, and the other group carried David Seaman. So we're now like 11, 12 players. We've got 2 of us got a leg, 2 of us got an arm, and we're running around the outside of London Colney with Dave Seaman laying back like being carried, trying to beat our previous time. That's how much George was in our heads. We was like, you know, he was one step ahead of us all the time, trying to push us, but it was all about the team. It was about carrying each other. It was about pushing each other. And those first couple of weeks of pre-season were massively bonding, because we had unlike today, they have a closed season training plan. So they'll have exercises they need to do, certain targets they need to meet. They'll be plugging their bloody heart monitors into their computer for their coaches to look at what they've been doing all that week. We had nothing. It was just like, get yourself kind of fit before you come back, but we'll get you fit in those first 2 weeks. So that was the pain part, because a lot of people, you know, people like Merce used to come back a couple of pounds overweight, and it'd be all the vomiting at the bottom of the hills, and, you know, but still carrying on doing the running, still carrying his partner up the hill, even though he didn't want to, and getting a pat on the back at the end of the day. And that's what pulled us together in those first couple of years under George. It was an amazing
That's
time.
brilliant. I love that. I love that story. Someone was saying, imagine if you had to carry, if Razor Ruddock was your teammate.
That's it. Yeah, you carried the fattest one, and that's the other thing. There weren't no wokeness about it back then. You carried the overweight fat bloke that hadn't looked after himself in the summer, and so we're all punished, and we've got to carry the big fella. But we had a laugh, and, you know, and it was about as much about bonding as about pushing yourself, and we really did push ourselves. And I look at the games now they play. 5 pre-season games they've got this season. 3 of them are going to be in America, where it's going to be a lot of promo stuff, a lot of players turning up, more for the camera, really. But us, we was just head down, running for 4 or 5 weeks.
It's really, I love these stories and kind of the evolution of sports, which is why I don't poo-poo comparing eras or players. We all get sucked into it, right? But there's something to be said about, I don't know, when I watch Rocky, I find it so much more inspiring than watching a Marvel comic book and some, you know, superhero getting ready and G'd up with training with webs and all this type of stuff. Rocky's like literally using anything around him, whether it's meat, whether it's an old wagon trailer or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah.
But
so
all the lads, Soph, that had turned up on that first pre-season day or whatever, you know, your Dave Rocastles, your Mickey Thomases, who were fantastic players, that's all they had. They had like a ball on a bit of string that they used to kick around in the streets. That's all we had back then. And they were trained, and they trained and honed their skills with minimum support. And it was all so natural. So, you know, when you're meeting these players, it was, everything was natural talent back then. It was all natural talent. And I don't want to say that today's football's not great, and we see some fantastic technical abilities, but
it's a bit robotic. It's become a little bit robotic.
A lot of support. Everything that you saw back in the day was something that Dave Rocastle had learnt his tricks, age 6 and 7, ran some back of some working class housing estate, kicking a ball up against the wall, you know, in worn out trainers. So that's what made it so much more special back then for me. That's what made it for me.
You know, a lot of people have been coming out of these Euros, even Copa America, where you usually see the razzle dazzle. I was talking to Dan and the squaddies about how it's probably one of the worst Copa Americas I've ever seen, because there was none of that in the Euros. Where's the razzle dazzle player? You know, doing. It's almost like now you get scolded for doing tricks, right? I'm not saying be Anthony from Manchester United. But one of the things I think that made Ronaldo so special when he came to the Premier League was the fact that, wow, this guy is an artist on the pitch. And I just don't think that we get a lot of that now. And it all seems to be a little bit regimented. Robotic players seem to be like, you mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger earlier. It's like a Total Recall or something. And it's no disrespect. It's just the way and the world we live in, David, you know.
Yeah, it's the way football has evolved. I mean, even over the years, we've seen the closeness between the fan and the player disappear a little bit. You know, the fact that half of us used to get up off the tube and turn up at Arsenal to go and do start our apprenticeship. They're probably getting taxis picked up outside their house in the morning and a taxi straight to London Colney, like their chauffeur driven there. And that's the way things have moved on. So from my personal point of view, I think I was fortunate to be in that era of the last ones that came through a natural sort of progression, and I was lucky enough to have my peers like LaRoe Castles, Mickey Thomas's, Tony Adams, Mercy's and stuff like that went through the same thing. So I'm blessed from that point of view. But I think now it's more about the money, it's more about the buck. So there's a lot more at stake for clubs. I totally get that. And sports science, statistics all make a massive difference now. But it's just something we won't get back. It's just, you know, it is kind of just romancing about an old era a little bit, I suppose.
And I think it's important that we do. And this is one of the things that I love about what we do here at Highbury Squad is that, and the Guns and Yellow Ribbons guys do a really good job of it too, is just reminding people about where we've come from and how it used to be. And I think it's important that players like you led the way, many players before you led the way for you.
Before me.
Yeah, and it's so important that in a time where we are more globalized, that we keep the heart. I'm all for everyone enjoying the Arsenal Football Club, no matter where you come from. I live in the States now, and I still think I'm as important as a fan as the fan that goes through the turnstiles. But it's important for us to tell the stories and keep the history alive so that there is that connection. You know, Arsenal Football Club is a London club. I'm a North London girl. I was born and bred in North London. And I think those things are really important. Right. We've talked about like the backbone of pre-season, the role of the manager, the brotherhood, the pain, and the mental side of it a little bit. And James has a good question, which I'll get to in just a little bit. But what about staying the course? I put this picture up earlier because teams can start well, you know, we haven't finished well the last 2 seasons, David. And a lot of that comes from what happens. Kev always used to say, it's so important what happens on the training pitch. Like this repetitiveness is important and fundamental. What you do, what you say, how you start the season in order to get to this point where you become a winner, you have the fruits of your labor, you're able to have, you know, the appetite to keep winning. You taste it once, you taste it twice. Talk to me a little bit about how do you stay the course when things get tough? Because a lot of the times you see like certain players, if they're not happy, like they've talked about changing room revolutions, things aren't going well, let's throw the manager under the bus. You know, they talk to me about staying the course and sticking together in those moments and where that comes from. If it is something driven in pre-season.
I think there is. I've had sort of conflicting pre-seasons. I've been at clubs where at Arsenal when we've won every pre-season game and then gone out first game of the season against Norwich, been a couple of goals up at half time and got beat 3-2 at the end of the game, first game of the season after a brilliant pre-season, and then started on a sort of downhill slope. I've been at clubs where we've won all the pre-season games and then flunked right at the start of the season. At Portsmouth, we had a brilliant pre-season and then struggled for the first 6 months of the season. But I think the main thing is keeping everybody fit. So when you lose key players right at the start in pre-season, it's very difficult for them to come back during the season and have the impact they could have if it was from the start of the season. So I think that's key. And when we played in those, especially in 1991, when we won the title, nearly became when we was almost invincible. I don't remember anyone getting injured all season. Basically, everybody was fit all the time. And I'm not just talking first team squad. I'm talking youth team, reserves, and first team. I think that year, youth team were top of the youth team league, reserves were top of the combination, and the first team were top of the old first division. And that was no coincidence. That was because of consistency in training, consistency in availability of key personnel and of all personnel, and testament to how the staff managed it. I mean, we had 6 staff back in the day. I don't know. They must have been working 28 hours a day to keep that club running. I mean, now I know Arteta's probably doing 14-hour days, 16-hour days. He probably don't put the ball down all day. But back then, there weren't the help. So the effort these guys were putting in to make it work for us. And that's what and we reciprocated it. And when you get players and teams that do that, it works. It worked with Ranieri and the Leicester side. He had a team that he took who were just at their absolute peak of their collectiveness, their togetherness, their fitness. Everything was peaking. If he'd have done that a year later, they'd have won nothing. But he got them at the right time. And that's what George made at Arsenal when he came, first of all. He made that team to carry us through for 4 or 5 years. And I think Arteta's doing that now. He's got to the stage. He's 4 or 5 years in now. He's got the consistency. He just needs to keep everybody fit, everybody challenging for positions. That's the key.
Do you think though that Mikel? I want to ask you this question: is there more joy in the journey than there is in the finality of winning? Because I'm going to look at this season. Last season, I just let myself go and I enjoyed the journey as a fan. The season prior I was too stressed because, we were in an improbable situation. We could win the league. No one thought it was going to happen, that we would challenge in that way. And then it became all about, well, we really need to get back into the Champions League for fiscal reasons more than anything, not because I or a lot of Arsenal fans thought we could win it. Do you think there might be an issue with Mikel being caught up too much in the journey, or at the end of the day, he wants to win as badly as the next, manager? But is there a chance that maybe this team is caught up too much in the journey and doesn't have the ruthlessness or the edge to win? And can that only come by winning something?
I think there's a potential now in football. If you're not the top team like Man City, who's taking every honour across the board on a regular basis for a 4 or 5 year period, if you're one of these teams that's trying to grab a title or grab a cup, I think the importance of Champions League football and keeping the interest high in that football club is definitely more important than the overall success of the manager or the team. I think there is an over. We didn't have that back in the day. You was judged on where you finished in the league and what you won. No one was interested in how much money the club made. Did it break even? Could it afford these players next season? Could it? No, that wasn't a concern. So that wasn't nothing. George didn't have to worry about that. He just had to worry about, I'm going to get in the top three and I'm going to do my best to win something and keep 40,000 people coming through the turnstiles every week. They're almost guaranteed to get 60,000 through the turnstiles every week, wherever they finish. So now it's about finances. It's about ruling the world. I don't think back in the day it was about ruling the world. We was judged against the Liverpools and the Manchester Uniteds. We wasn't judged against the Madrids, the Barcelonas, the top teams around the world. So I think the manager's remit then was a lot less than it is now. So there's a lot more pressure on Mikel Arteta than there was on George Graham. He just had to be a domestic champion, and he did that with domestic players playing a domestic game. And I think it is very different now, the targets for managers, for clubs, for people like Edu and their visions of the future. It was a lot simpler back then, and a lot more, I think, tangible to the working class person. It's not, you could go and buy a ticket on a Saturday for an Arsenal game. You could just rock up and get a ticket at the stadium. Now everything's got to be pre-planned. It's not like it was back in the day. It's just a different era, a different kind of football.
Now it's hard enough winning the lottery. Now you've got to win the Arsenal lottery to get a ticket.
Yeah,
ticket to the game. Okay, I've got a few quick fire ones for you before we get to just a few questions. We've got another 15 minutes or so here with David. This is brilliant stuff, getting into the mind of a player, taking us beyond the white line. And I think you'll know who used to say that a lot. And so we thought, listen, we've got to have a show about it now. There's no doubt about that. So you're talking about the pressures of Mikel, the insatiable appetite and instant gratification of modern day football. It all starts at the very top. Do you believe in the Cronkies now? Do you think they're well vested in this team when you look at what we've done in the market, especially over the last 2 or 3 seasons?
I really try and stay out of sort of the boardroom. I've got to be honest, Soph. I try and stay out of the boardroom, and I try and stay out of the player acquisition area. Who's coming in and who's going out, because I just think, I'm old school. If I go down the road and I say to this bloke, I'm going to work for you, I'm working for him. It don't matter whether he's putting money into the business, whether he's doing it right. I've signed a contract with you. I'm working for you. I'm going to do my best for you. But I think now everyone's got an opinion on what's happening and what, should they be putting this back into the club, and are the club good with that businessman at the head of them? Is his business acumen, is that the kind of person we want here? Listen, he's done all right by the club. The club are earning money. They're at the top of the league. They're investing in players. And for me as a fan, just from a fan's point of view, I think we have never been more attractive to other players, big players, coming to us than we are at the moment. And we've still got a way to go with that. So is he doing,
that's very well said.
Is he doing it all right? I think he's doing all right. Yeah, he must be doing something right. He's invested in the manager and the staff, and it's working.
Listen, I've gotten a lot of stick for sticking up for the Cronkies, even during, a difficult time. So I'm for it. I'm for them. And I think we're one of the best run clubs in the Premier League. Right. Does Mikel have to win a trophy for you this season?
I think he has to win something for himself and his players this season, definitely, because you want a culmination of the success to end in something. Coming so close 2 years in a row, but falling short, and it's not other teams that have gone out and beaten us. We've lost it in the last 2 seasons. So, we was way ahead of Man City season before last, and if 3 or 4 results had gone our way against smaller teams, we'd have won the league. Same again this season. If we'd have done just those couple of games before Christmas, we dropped 6 points before we went to Dubai. If there'd have been a turnaround then, we would have probably won the league. So from that point of view, and for the sake of progression, I think, yes, he needs to win something this season to keep everybody on board. If he doesn't, and this is the danger of doing better 2 consecutive seasons. So 2 seasons ago, we was good, but not as good as we were last season. So the fans have seen a progression. They'll be happy with that. But the next level of progression is a trophy. There's no way around it. It's either the league or very least the FA Cup. If not, maybe the European Cup. I think always Premier League is top of the hit list.
I was saying that I'd like us to win the League Cup because last time we won it, you were in the team and Kev, and winning a trophy in February could breed some fire to go for the remainder of the 3 months for the season to really give them a taste. I think winning a trophy mid-season.
We've got to consistently over the next few years improve our Premier League. Maybe it's got to be our Premier League standing. We've got to get to that top spot because otherwise, and like I just said to you a few minutes ago, players won't want to come to the club. You've only got to drop out of the top 3, top 4, and you actually become 4th choice for one of the best players in Europe who's available. And that's the market you're operating in every single year. So if you want to keep missing out on players, and if you consistently miss out on them for 3 or 4 years, then you will see that reflected in your team position. So we really need to build on it and dominate more than we did last year because we're on an upward curve and we need to keep that going. Mikel needs to keep that going, I think. I don't think he'll be in danger of getting booted out, but I think he'll lose people on the way if it doesn't happen.
Fair. You talked about injuries and in particular, some of the seasons you played for Arsenal having, hardly any injuries matters. Post Euros and the ongoing question about having cover for Saka, I have a feeling Jesus will be covering or playing, starting on the left, maybe even. Yeah. Martinelli needs to have a really big season. I have a feeling that Jesus might have a massive season for Arsenal. Is he post Euros even more so now? Do you think Saka is the most important player to the Arsenal? Because last season everyone was talking about Odegaard was magic, Saliba hugely important. I mean, we have some players now where it's hard to pick, but is he, especially post Euros now, you see the most important player for the Arsenal?
I don't think he is, Soph. No, I don't think he is, and I don't. It's no disrespect to Bukayo because I think he's an absolute inspiration to anybody who wants to become a footballer and stay true to themselves. Because I think he's such a humble, lovely person who's not succumbed to football fame. He just goes out and does his best every week. He plays in the true Arsenal spirit, but I don't think he's absolutely integral to that side. I think his returns were phenomenal last year from the wing. His assists, his goals, his availability to play. I mean, I don't think he missed a couple of games. I think only Saliba was more available than him for the whole season. So from that point of view, he's been the most reliable, mega consistent, high achieving player in the side. But I don't actually think he's critical to that side. I think players, and I'm a great believer of the spine of a team being the strongest part of it, your central defenders, your central midfield, and your centre forward. I think everybody else on the outside, and it's probably going to piss a few players off who I played with and that, but they're all fancy players. They're all luxuries in the team, as George Graham would say. Some players are luxuries, so you've got to have them. But there's lots of luxuries out there at the moment. There's some great players who could just slot into our side on those wings. You look at Crystal Palace and some of their forward players. You could say, you know what, I'd swap one of them for Saka for a couple of games to give him a rest, and that's how fine it is. I don't think we can lose Ødegaard at all this season. I think Declan Rice is going to be mega important. I still think he needs to bring more to the table for the team. Saliba at the back. I think the spine is the main thing. So yeah, a simple answer would be no. As great as Saka is, I don't think he's the most important player in the side, but he's a player I'd love to have in there, and I'd pick him every week.
What's your take on, Kev never accepted the excuse of fatigue, tired. What do you mean they're tired? Get out there and play. But, players are playing a lot. How do you feel mentally and physically? The players who played in the Euros and Copa, I think Copa is, Brazil didn't fare too well, but how do you feel these players will compare when they come back? Because there's going to be a period, Declan Rice, William Saliba and Saka need some time off. Trossard didn't go as far. Havertz, mentally draining, especially playing in the host country for your nation. These are all massive undertakings as a professional footballer. And one of the things that concerns me is they're not going to be ready together at the right time. Is that fair or foul?
No, I think that's fair. I think like anybody who works really hard, who's committed to their job 6 days a week, and footballers, even when they're not playing football or training, they still have to have the discipline to be committed to their job. They make decisions based on their job. Everything is job focused. There's no respite from thinking about I am a footballer. They so need and deserve 2 or 3 weeks where they can switch off with their family, just relax, take time out from football. And that's the most important thing. I don't necessarily think it's a physical thing. They're looked after really well. They have proper rest days after matches or lots of matches in a row. They're well monitored. So I agree with the big man up in the sky 100% that there's no excuses for fatigue. But I think sometimes you need to get away from the game a little bit. These guys have got lives. They do need a work-life balance, just a little bit of it back, spend some time with their families. So I think it's important that they spend 2 or 3 weeks away, come back into training late, maybe miss the first couple of pre-season games. But like I said, they'll all have gyms wherever in their houses now. I mean, I didn't have a gym. I had a road outside and, a few tins of beans or something like that. If I wanted to do curls, I'll get the big 5 kilo tins of stuff. And it was like, yeah, it was, but now they look after themselves physically. So that's not an issue. I just think they need a break from the football and just to, spend a bit of time away from it to regroup.
Yeah. This gives me a good I want to ask this question, and some of you sent in some great questions, and I'm going to save those for the next time David's on, because they're good and they're relevant to a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to be talking about. But this one from James, good evening Sophie and David, just wanted to ask David, were there any psychologists or focus on the mental well-being of players at Arsenal in his time, or did the players maybe lift each other? I think he'd also heard a previous interview, maybe earlier today, with Stan Collymore talking about mental health. I know from even growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was very different. I mean, mental health is at the forefront of everything now. But we also talk about mentally, physically. I'm not talking about mental health issues for players. Mentally, you get exhausted. You can come home from a shift at work, and you're mentally exhausted. Doesn't mean you have mental health issues. But I'm assuming no, David.
Absolutely no. It wasn't even a term that was spoken about. No one. We didn't even mention that. I mean, to us, the right mentality meant we was focused on the game. That was all mentality meant to us then. It didn't have this multi-dimensional sort of meaning, where it can be about your health, physical, your levels of anxiety, anything like that. No one took any interest in that. No, it was just it's how it was. But like I said, we was brought up in that era. So maybe it was less for us to, in hindsight, it's probably less for us to worry about. You know, we didn't have to worry about mental health because we didn't know about it. And it was just, you know, kick you up the arse and get on with it and crack on. But I'm sure there were players who were low, depressed, you know, players who didn't sort of weren't playing that well, maybe hadn't scored for a little while if they was a forward. I don't know, but it never raised its head in the dressing room. You talk about players, oh, he's on a goal drought, he's not scored for 12 games. Well, that's just that. If that was ever mentioned, it was only ever mentioned in the press. No one in our dressing room ever noticed that Alan Smith or Ian Wright didn't score for 12 games if they didn't. Nobody really give a toss about that. We just thought, who are we playing on Saturday? And hopefully Wrighty will score. That was it. There was no deeper thinking than that. But maybe it would have made a difference to one or two. But I think that was just the era we was brought up in. Like you said, it wasn't a concern back then.
It wasn't. It was. In fact, it was taboo at times to talk about that.
It probably was. It probably was. I mean, I went through the era where there was abuse of players, of young players. 12 and 13-year-olds at football clubs. Particularly one of the guys who was at Chelsea then. I'm not going to mention his name, but he went to Charlton, and I didn't realise 25 years later, his name got brought up in this Chelsea scandal. And my experience of him at Charlton, he was a lovely bloke. You know, yes, he used to give me a chocolate bar every time I got in his van when he used to give me a lift home. But he never tried anything with me because my dad was 6'5" and 18 stone, and he wouldn't have risked it. But there was kids out there that were being mentally and physically abused, but no one said nothing. So no one said nothing back then. So we didn't know it was going on. I didn't know this bloke that I liked was an evil person.
It's so true, because even now people are afraid to come forward, and let alone back then. And the truth of it is, it's very difficult for men to come forward in these situations.
I think for anyone, but it's just good now that there are these avenues that people can say, do you know what, that's not right. I don't want to be talked to or brought up like that, and that's fine. But it just wasn't around then, so we did what we did.
Yeah, it's so true. And what I mean by that is, like, generally they, if you look at, listen to experts and stuff, men have this fear of how they're going to be seen. I mean, women, forget what women have to deal with, on a daily basis over the years or whatever. For men to be in these situations, especially, when you're supposed to be seen as strong, it's almost impossible. And back then it was just, very, very different. And thank goodness we live in a time now where people feel braver. People feel there are avenues to pursue conversations and let people know and being exposed too, because that was the other thing. Lots of things were hidden back then. But yeah, listen, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you this evening. I do want to play a message, and I know that you will love it too. When we did the tribute show to Super Kev, we had a technical issue with a very special message from an absolute Arsenal icon, Arsenal legend, and that was Vic Akers. And Vic has been in touch, and he's been lovely. He's going to come on the show soon, Squaddies, so we can have a football conversation. He absolutely adored Super Kev. We did a show together a couple of times, which was just absolute gold, as you can imagine, David, listening to the two of them tell stories. And he had also been speaking to the Everton kit man, and so he sent this message, and I wanted to play it. Number one, so Kev's family can hear it, and Vic's too, and also all of you Squaddies.
Hi Sophie, it's Vic. Just to say a few words about Kevin, so I'm unable to come and do the program. I spoke to Jimmy Martin also, who was at Everton, kit man, and has the same words and values that I do about Kevin. So it's a joint thing, really. All we can say is that the last pod that we did, which was a little while ago, when he was in good spirits, I think most is said on that we wanted to say together, and nothing's changed. And apart from the fact that he's no longer with us, and that's the most saddest thing ever. And we do miss him already. And what a great guy he was. And in everybody's eyes that I knew, who knew Kevin, they all say the same thing about him. So it wasn't just Jimmy and I. It was everybody that knew Kev, and he'll be sadly missed, and by all in the football world, I know, and ex-players have also expressed, that I say something about those as well. They all think the same, and I think all I can say is it's a massive, sad loss, and to have Kevin gone, and we only wish in the best, in a better place, hopefully. And my regards to his family, and condolences, obviously, because I know they'll miss him a hell of a lot more. Thanks very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about him, and hope to see you soon.
Beautiful message there from Vic Akers, our Arsenal legend. He really is an Arsenal legend. I just love the man to pieces. He's so kind as well. And the fact that I get to exchange messages and check in to see how Vic Akers is, I have to pinch myself every now and again. And this is what you guys have done for us, David. We talked about it with Jack Wilshere too. Despite going through tough moments, one of the pictures I put up earlier was the sacrifice worth it? And I know that you and Kev say every day of the week, absolutely it was. And Jack Wilshere, I said to him, you guys are such a huge part of the memories of our lives. We can put down, hold on, my mum got married what year? Oh yeah, Arsenal were playing. I'm just, it's so ingrained in us, this football culture and this community that is the Arsenal. And I know it means the world to you, and to have legends like Vic Akers be part of our squad, and talk about Kevin as well like that, the way Kevin talked about his heroes too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just listening to Vic there, all it bangs home to me is that how lucky I was to have had all of those people in my life. No different to when you talk about being part of your Arsenal community and the players and the managers and the team over the years giving you great memories. They gave me great memories too, Soph. Just because I played don't mean that I don't have the same memories and the same feelings that have been formed and molded by all of the people that have crossed my path through my playing career. I've just been fortunate to be on the grass and not in the stand. And everybody says, oh yeah, I'd love to be on the pitch and to do that. Some people wouldn't. Some people are not made out to be like that, and that's not their game. Some people are supposed to be in the stand supporting, and they give just as much to the teams as the players do out on the pitch. And I think that's when you look at those squads there. I mean, especially that one. You look at me, Ian Selly, me and Kev there. The lads in that, all the lads in my youth team photo that one or two of them got a sniff in the first team. But ultimately, do they think that they failed in football because they didn't play for Arsenal's first team? No. All of them think they succeeded because they made it in Arsenal's youth team. They don't judge themselves by what they did after that. I've spoke to loads, everybody in that picture of the youth team I've spoke to since Kev's passing. And I know that Kev wouldn't have seen some of them for 25 years, maybe, you know, or spoke to them. They still hold him in as high regard as they did back then. And he, on the last day of his life, would have held them in that same regard as well, even though he hadn't seen them for 20 years. Because we had a time together which we can't get back. For love nor money or success of that team in the future, we formed bonds and relationships back then that could have only been formed back then. If we'd have met today as a team, we'd be totally different to what we was back then. But we met in 1986 as a group of players, all shoved together for 2 years of a very important 2 years of our footballing career, the 2 years which turned us into real Arsenal believing and Arsenal supporters, Arsenal players, everyone in that youth team. So, yeah, three or four of us went on to make first team appearances, but we were no different to those other 14 kids that lifted the Youth Cup. No different.
I love that. That's beautiful. Very beautifully said. And some great comments from the squaddies in the chat. And I'm sure there'll be tons as well from those who are going to be listening later on when they're hopefully having a nice cup of tea. That was really just summed up perfectly. And I don't even need to say anything else after that, other than you will be coming on the show. We're going to be seeing you this season, popping in and talking football with us. And David's going to be the calm head. My head's calmed a lot. Kev gave me that compliment this season. He goes, "You're not as nuts as you used to be," which is a good thing. So hopefully this will be the season where we bring it home. You can follow, give Dave a follow on the old X, and tell your friends about this show. And we will be back live tomorrow night with Lee Judges for another round. Until then, you know how the show ends at Squaddies. Don't forget to tell your loved ones you love them, and give your favorite people a cuddle tonight. See you tomorrow. Thanks again, Dave. Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Please stand clear of the discussion doors. The next stop is Highbury Squad.